Hello everybody and welcome to week 3. Today I'm going to be discussing a guide written by John Sanders about using reflection in medical education. Some of my objectives are first going to be to define the concept of reflection and some of its main features, to list some possible outcomes of the process of reflection, specifically ones that are important to medical education, understanding methods of using reflection in medical education, and then of course recognizing some barriers to that implementation, and finally talking about some areas of research that would improve implementation of reflection. So I like to start out with a simple definition. I chose this one from chapter 6 of our readings this week, where reflection is defined as a cycle of what, so what, and now what, where what is defined as the new activity or experience, so what is the analysis of that experience, and now what is incorporating that into our current understanding to influence future action. The authors actually define reflection as a metacognitive process that occurs before, during, and after situations with the purpose of developing greater understanding of both the self and situation so that future encounters with the situation are informed from previous encounters. Now, there's a couple of terms that I thought were important in this definition. The first one is metacognitive. This means that the process is a way of thinking about thinking. And this implies that we can learn to reflect better. The next part is that this process can occur before, during, or after the event. We typically think of reflection as occurring after the event has already passed, but if we try to reflect before we go into a situation, this can actually improve growth and learning. During this process, we need to try to understand both the situation and the self. Understanding the self is especially important for developing self-awareness, the therapeutic self, self-efficacy, and self-regulation, which are all essential to lifelong learning, which we are all lifelong learners in medicine. And finally, in order to change any of our future action, we need to analyze the previous encounters and then integrate that into our mental models, and we can use those for pattern recognition. So when we think about how we're going to implement reflection in medical education, it really depends on what our desired outcomes are. There's 3 specifically that Sanders reviews in this article, including reflection for learning, where he defines reflection as an active learning process. Reflection for therapeutic relationship. This is really important for gaining trust between provider and patient, and it requires a lot of self-awareness of your own values, beliefs, and biases, and how those can affect your decision making. And finally, reflection for the development of professional practice. So if we think back to the naturalistic decision-making model, we know that experience is important. So expertise here is gained by repeated exposure to complicated situations, and then we can develop those mental models that we talked about in the last slide to use with pattern recognition. So in terms of reflection in medical education, these methods can be self-directed or facilitated, and they range from group debriefings to standard or traditional written diaries, use of new technologies, and also creative endeavors like painting, drawing, and poetry. No matter what method you use to implement reflection, there's always going to be some common barriers in terms of low engagement, difficulties with skill sets regarding various phases of reflection, and then also a lack of proper integration of reflection into the curriculum. Further research would focus on ways to overcome those barriers. Some specific research areas could include the use of facilitators, being able to use new technologies to coordinate with different learning styles, actually being able to measure the impact of reflection on clinical care, looking at impulsivity and how that affects noticing, which is a really important metacognitive skill, and then in relation to that, mindfulness training as well. So in conclusion, reflection can lead to various outcomes, but overall the essence is the same. We're looking to understand a previous action in order to improve our responses to future ones. We can use reflection in medical education, and typically the outcomes are going to be improvement in learning, therapeutic relationships, and professional practice. But of course, implementation of reflection depends on your desired outcome, as well as various learning styles and skill sets that students come to their program with. Finally, desired outcomes may be improved through research on how to overcome some of the common barriers to implementation of reflective practice. So as always, I hope that this has given you a little bit of insight into reflective practice. I thank everybody for watching and look forward to your feedback.